A woman in a simple gray hoodie walks into one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, a place she owns from the marble floors to the crystal chandeliers. She's not there for an inspection. She's there for a quiet meal, a moment of peace. But the new manager sees only her casual clothes and the color of her skin. He leans in, his voice a venomous whisper. "I'm sorry, but we have a standard to maintain. People like you don't belong here. Please leave." He had no idea he wasn't just talking to a customer. He was talking to his boss, Isabella Sterling, the architect of his entire career. And in the next 60 seconds, she wouldn't just shatter his world. She would unleash a chain reaction of karma so severe, it would change all of their lives forever. Isabella Izzy Sterling loved the rain. She loved the way it washed the grime from the city streets, leaving a glistening sheen on the asphalt that reflected the neon signs of downtown Austin. On this particular Tuesday evening, she wore a simple, charcoal gray hoodie, the hood pulled up not to be conspicuous, but to simply feel the comforting embrace of anonymity. Underneath, she wore a pair of worn-in jeans and comfortable sneakers. She had just spent the afternoon hauling boxes and setting up displays for a youth art charity event she sponsored, and the last thing she wanted was the pomp and circumstance that came with being Isabella Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Hospitality Group. Her flagship restaurant, Aura, was her baby. She had sketched its design on a napkin 6 years ago, dreaming of a place that blended Texan warmth with Michelin star elegance. Now it was a titan of the culinary world, with a 3-month waiting list for a reservation. Izzy rarely visited unannounced and never ever dressed like this. But tonight, she craved her own creation, specifically the seared scallops with saffron risotto, a dish her late grandmother had taught her to make, a dish that grounded her whenever the pressures of her empire became too much. She pushed through the heavy oak doors, a gust of wind and rain following her in. The hostess stand was momentarily empty. The low, warm lighting of Aura immediately enveloped her. The gentle hum of conversation and the clinking of silverware, a familiar symphony. The air smelled of truffle oil, roasted garlic, and old money. She saw couples on dates, business partners closing deals, and families celebrating milestones. This was what she had built, a stage for life's moments. A man in a suit so sharp it could cut glass intercepted her before she took 3 steps. He was tall, with slicked-back blonde hair and a look of practiced superiority. He didn't recognize her. She had only met him once, briefly, via a video call during his final interview a month ago. This was Chad Miller, the new general manager she had hired to bring a firmer hand to the front-of-house operations. "Can I help you?" Chad asked, his tone laced with a dismissive chill. He eyed her hoodie, the faint smudge of paint on her jeans she'd missed, and the simple sneakers. His eyes didn't just see her clothes. They scanned her, cataloged her, and found her wanting. "Yes," Izzy said, offering a small, polite smile. "I was hoping to get a table for one, or even just a seat at the bar." Chad's lips curled into a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, Aura is fully booked this evening. We're typically reserved months in advance." He spoke slowly, as if to a child. "I understand. I was just hoping there might have been a last-minute cancellation," she replied, keeping her voice even. She knew for a fact there were 2 open seats at the chef's counter, seats she deliberately kept open for walk-ins or special guests. It was one of her secret policies. Chad glanced over her shoulder toward the door, as if expecting security to materialize. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Furthermore, we do maintain a dress code here. Smart casual, I'm sure you can understand." He gestured vaguely at her attire, his meaning crystal clear. "You are not our kind of people." A prickle of irritation ran down Izzy's spine. She had faced this kind of subtle, coded prejudice her entire life. The assumptions made based on her appearance, her race. She had thought, naively perhaps, that owning the building would make her immune to it within these 4 walls. "My apologies," Izzy said, her voice dropping a fraction of a degree. "I've had a long day. I'm just hungry. I'm sure if you just check your system for the chef's counter—" "There is nothing to check," Chad interrupted, his patience gone. He took a step closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial yet threatening whisper. "Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is a high-end establishment. We have a standard to maintain. People like you don't belong here. Please leave before I have to make this uncomfortable. The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. People like you. It was a phrase designed to cut, to diminish, to exclude. Every head that turned in their direction, every whisper that started at the nearby tables, felt like a physical blow. Her sanctuary, her tribute to her grandmother, had just been weaponized against her. The anonymity she had craved had turned into a cloak of invisibility, rendering her worthless in the eyes of the very man she paid to uphold her values. Izzy looked past him, her eyes scanning the room. She saw her staff. Maria, the hostess who had been with her since day one, was studiously avoiding her gaze while polishing wine glasses. A waitress, a sharp-featured woman named Karen Vance, smirked in Chad's direction, giving him a subtle nod of approval. The rest of the crew just watched, frozen, like deer in headlights. Their silence was its own form of betrayal. The warmth Izzy had felt upon entering Aura had vanished. It was replaced by an ice-cold clarity. She had not come here for a fight. She had not come here for a test. But a test had found her, and Chad Miller, along with her entire front-of-house staff, had just failed spectacularly. She held Chad's gaze. Her polite smile was gone, replaced by a calm, unnerving stillness. The rain-soaked, casually dressed woman he was trying to eject from the restaurant was gone. In her place stood a CEO. Uncomfortable, Izzy repeated softly, the word a blade of ice. You have no idea. Chad seemed to take her quiet tone as a sign of submission. He puffed out his chest, a self-satisfied glint in his eyes. He was the protector of the gate, the guardian of Aura's prestige. That's right, he said, his voice regaining its normal volume, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. So, if you'll just turn around and walk out the way you came in, we can all get back to our evening. Karen Vance, the waitress who had been observing with relish, decided to insert herself. She glided over, a caricature of concern on her face. Is everything all right, Chad? Is this person bothering our guests? She emphasized the word person with a sneer, making it sound like an infestation. I'm handling it, Karen, Chad said, appreciating the backup. He felt emboldened. She was just leaving. But Izzy didn't move. She simply stood there, a pillar of calm in the storm of their making. She met Karen's gaze, then let her eyes drift over to Maria at the hostess stand, who was now visibly trembling. She saw the busboys pretending to be busy, the bartenders wiping down an already spotless counter. She saw their complicity, their fear, their silent endorsement of their new manager's bigotry. What is your full name? Izzy asked, her voice dangerously soft. The question caught Chad off guard. What? Your name and your title here, she repeated, her tone unwavering. He scoffed. I'm Chad Miller, the general manager. Not that it's any of your business. Now, for the last time. And you, she said, turning her head slightly to acknowledge the waitress. Karen Vance, isn't it? Lead server. Karen's smirk faltered for a second. It was unsettling that this woman knew her name. She chalked it up to having seen her name tag. That's right, and I'll be asking you to leave as well. Izzy let a beat of silence pass, allowing their arrogance to hang in the air like spoiled perfume. The patrons at the surrounding tables were now openly staring, their dinners forgotten. The restaurant, once filled with a pleasant buzz, was growing quiet. You're right about one thing, Mr. Miller, Izzy began, her voice resonating with a newfound authority that seemed to come from the very floorboards. You do have a standard to maintain here at Aura, a standard of respect, of dignity, of hospitality, a standard that dictates that anyone who walks through these doors is treated as an honored guest, regardless of whether they're wearing a tailored suit or a simple, rain-soaked hoodie. She took a slow step forward, and for the first time, Chad felt a flicker of uncertainty. There was a power in this woman's posture, a command in her voice that was entirely at odds with her appearance. You were hired, Mr. Miller, to uphold my standards, Izzy continued, her voice rising slightly, cutting through the silence. You were entrusted with my most valuable creation. Not just the building, not the menu, but the feeling people get when they come here. And you have failed. Your standards? Chad blurted out, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. Who the hell do you think you are? Izzy didn't answer him directly. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her jeans and pulled out her phone. It was a simple, elegant motion, but it felt as dramatic as a gunslinger drawing his weapon. With a few taps, she selected a contact from her favorites and put the phone to her ear. The entire restaurant was now dead silent. The only sound was the faint, tinny ringing from Izzy's phone. Chad and Karen exchanged a confused look. Was she calling the police? The Better Business Bureau? A voice answered on the first ring. "David, it's Isabella." The name dropped into the room like a stone into a silent pond. Isabella? Chad's face went white. His mind scrambled, trying to connect the dots. Isabella? Isabella Sterling? No, it couldn't be. He'd seen pictures of her online. Power suits, immaculate hair, accepting awards. Not this. "Yes, I'm at Aura," Izzy said into the phone, her eyes locked on Chad. "There's been a situation with the front of house management. I need you to initiate a Code Phoenix." On the other end of the line was David Hayes, her chief operating officer. Code Phoenix was a protocol they had established years ago for catastrophic on-site failures. A gas leak, a fire, a health code disaster. It was a full-stop, scorched earth emergency plan. David's voice was tense. "Isabella, what's wrong? Is everyone okay? Is there a threat?" "The threat," Izzy said, her gaze sweeping over Chad, Karen, and the rest of the silent, watching staff, "is to the brand. The soul of this restaurant has been compromised. By my own team." Chad began to sweat. His tailored suit suddenly felt like a straitjacket. He could feel dozens of pairs of eyes on him. He saw a man at a corner table, a well-known tech investor he had been trying to impress all night, slowly raising his own phone and starting to record. "David," Izzy continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "effective immediately, the employment of the entire front-of-house staff currently on shift is terminated. General Manager, Chad Miller. Lead server, Karen Vance. The hostesses, the servers, the bussers, the bartenders. All of them. Have security here in 5 minutes to escort them out. And call our HR emergency line. I want their final paychecks and severance packages drawn up by morning. They are not to set foot in any Sterling hospitality property ever again." Her words were precise, clinical, and utterly devastating. A collective gasp went through the room. Karen Vance's jaw dropped, her face a mask of disbelief. Maria, the hostess, finally burst into tears. Izzy ended the call and slipped her phone back into her pocket. She looked at Chad, whose face had crumpled into a pathetic tableau of horror and dawning realization. "I believe," she said, her voice now resonating with the full weight of her authority, "you were telling me to leave my restaurant." The silence that followed Izzy's declaration was profound. It was the kind of quiet that feels loud, a vacuum where the normal sounds of life should be. For a few seconds, no one moved. The staff stood like statues in a tragic play, their faces painted with a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning terror. The diners were frozen, forks halfway to their mouths, their private conversations abandoned in favor of the raw, public spectacle unfolding before them. Chad Miller was the first to break. His mind, which had been so quick to judge and condemn, was now sputtering, unable to process the new reality. "No, you can't. This is a joke, right?" he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. He looked around wildly, seeking an ally, but found only stunned or scornful faces. "Do I look like I'm joking, Mr. Miller?" Izzy's voice was flat, devoid of the anger that had surely been simmering beneath the surface. What remained was a chillingly calm resolve. Karen Vance found her voice next, and it was shrill with indignation. "You can't just fire us. We have rights. There are procedures. Who even are you?" Even as she said it, the terrible truth was sinking in. The authority this woman wielded was absolute. "I am Isabella Sterling," she said, finally giving them the confirmation they dreaded. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her name settled over the room with the weight of a judge's gavel. "And these are my procedures." She turned her attention from the two main offenders and let her gaze sweep across the rest of the staff. She saw Leo, a young busboy who had only started 2 weeks ago, looking at the floor, his face pale with shame. She saw seasoned bartenders who had smirked along with Chad, now staring into the abyss of sudden unemployment. She saw servers who had bustled with purpose just minutes ago, now clutching their serving trays like life rafts. "All of you," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent dining room. "You stood there. You watched. You heard what he said, what she said. You saw a person being humiliated and belittled in the establishment that pays your salary, an establishment built on the principle of welcome. And you did nothing. Your silence was an endorsement. Your inaction was a choice. You chose his side, so you can share his fate." A young waitress near the back began to sob openly. "But I have kids. I need this job." "We all need this job," another server chimed in, his voice cracking with panic. Izzy's expression remained hard, but a flicker of something, regret perhaps, crossed her eyes for a fleeting moment. "And I needed a team I could trust," she said, the words heavy with disappointment. "I needed a team who understood what Aura stands for. It seems I had neither." The heavy oak doors swung open again, but this time it wasn't a diner. Two large men in professional black suits entered. They were part of Sterling Hospitality's private security team, stoic and efficient. They exchanged a brief, knowing glance with Izzy before turning their attention to the staff. The reality of the situation crashed down on the crew with the finality of a guillotine. This was not a bluff. This was not a misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with an apology. This was an execution. "Mr. Miller, Ms. Vance," the first security guard said, his voice polite but firm, "and the rest of the front-of-house team, please collect your personal belongings from the staff room. You will be escorted from the premises." Chad, his face now a blotchy red, finally snapped. The arrogant manager was gone, replaced by a desperate, cornered man. "This is insane. You're a tyrant. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I'll sue you for wrongful termination." Izzy gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Go ahead. I'm sure the press will be very interested to hear your side of the story. The story of how you were fired for refusing service to a black woman in a hoodie who just happened to own the restaurant. I imagine that will look wonderful on your resume." The threat of public humiliation hit him harder than the firing itself. His bluster deflated instantly, leaving him looking small and pathetic in his expensive suit. As the security guards began to gently but firmly guide the stunned staff toward the back, the diners began to react. Some started clapping, a slow, sporadic applause that grew in volume. They had witnessed an act of profound, immediate justice. A few shook their heads, murmuring about the brutality of it all. The man who had been recording on his phone finally lowered it, a look of awe on his face. The video was already uploaded. Izzy watched as her entire team was herded out. She saw their faces, the defiant, the terrified, the remorseful. She saw Leo, the young busboy, look back at her one last time, his eyes filled with a mixture of terror and a strange, quiet respect. He had been silent, yes, but unlike the others, he didn't look angry. He looked ashamed. The image stuck with her. Within 10 minutes, it was over. The front-of-house staff was gone. The security guard stood posted at the door. The kitchen staff, who had only heard the commotion, began peering out from the swinging doors, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Izzy was left standing in the middle of her own restaurant, surrounded by shocked diners and half-eaten plates of her grandmother's recipes. The triumphant applause had died down, replaced by an awkward, uncertain silence. She had won. She had asserted her power and defended her dignity. But as she looked around at the chaos, at the empty server stations, and the frightened faces of her kitchen crew, she didn't feel victorious. She felt a profound and chilling emptiness. She had cut out cancer, but in doing so, she had carved out a piece of her own heart. The restaurant, her beautiful, vibrant aura, suddenly felt like a tomb. The immediate aftermath was surreal. The diners, caught between finishing their expensive meals and leaving the scene of the corporate carnage, sat in awkward silence. The head chef, a burly man named Julian, finally emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, his face a mask of confusion. "Ms. Sterling, what in God's name is going on? My servers have vanished." Izzy took a deep breath, the adrenaline beginning to recede, leaving a hollow ache in its place. "There was an incident, Julian. The front-of-house staff has been let go." Julian's eyes widened. "All of them? Maria, the bartenders? But who will serve the guests?" It was a simple, practical question that highlighted the sheer magnitude of what she had just done. In a single, decisive act, she had decapitated her own business. "We're closing for the night," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. She turned to the remaining patrons. "Ladies and gentlemen, my deepest apologies for this disruption. Needless to say, all of your meals tonight are on the house. Please feel free to finish, but we will be unable to offer any further service. Please see David Hayes on your way out for complimentary vouchers for a future visit." David had arrived, his face grim. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man used to cleaning up messes, though none quite like this. He began speaking to the guests in hushed tones, his professionalism a stark contrast to the raw emotion that had just unfolded. Izzy walked through her restaurant, a ghost in her own machine. She saw a half-drunk bottle of champagne sagging in an ice bucket at a table celebrating an anniversary. She saw a child's drawing left on a tablecloth. She saw the digital order screens, filled with requests that would never be fulfilled. Each detail was a testament to the life that had been abruptly snuffed out. She ended up at the bar, slumping onto one of the stools. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished marble countertop. A woman in a hoodie who had just fired 27 people. The image felt jarring, contradictory. She had acted out of a deep-seated need to reclaim her dignity, to enforce a principle that was the very foundation of her business. But the cost was staggering. Was Maria, who had been with her for 6 years but had frozen in fear, as culpable as Chad? Was Leo, the terrified new busboy, deserving of the same fate as the sneering Karen Vance? She had used a sledgehammer to perform surgery, and now she was left with the bloody, messy reality. The story, of course, went viral before the night was over. The investor's video was everywhere. News outlets, blogs, and social media feeds exploded with the headline, "Black CEO fired her entire restaurant crew after manager's racist remarks." The internet, in its predictable way, became a battlefield. Thousands lauded her as a hero, a boss who delivered instant karma. They celebrated her power, her refusal to be victimized. Hashtags like Washi Sterling Justice and Code Phoenix trended for days. She became a symbol of empowerment, an icon for every person of color who had ever been made to feel small. But another, more insidious narrative began to bubble up. Critics called her a ruthless capitalist, a petulant billionaire who ruined the lives of working-class people over a minor slight. They painted her as emotionally unstable, a tyrant who wielded her power like a weapon. Pundits debated the proportionality of her response. Couldn't she have just fired the manager? They asked from their comfortable television studios. They didn't understand that the poison wasn't just in the manager, it was in the silence of the rest. The days that followed were a blur of damage control, emergency hiring sessions, and legal consultations. Izzy had to shut Aura down for 2 weeks to assemble a skeleton crew. The closure cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost revenue and spoiled inventory. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls from lawyers representing her former employees, all claiming wrongful termination and emotional distress. It was a logistical and financial nightmare, but the real toll was emotional. She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of her fired staff. She saw the panic in the young waitress's eyes as she mentioned her kids. She saw Leo's look of shame. She had wanted to punish the guilty, but her righteous fire had burned the innocent alongside them. The applause of strangers on the internet felt hollow. They hadn't been there. They hadn't seen the human cost. They saw a symbol, not a person grappling with the devastating consequences of her own actions. One evening, scrolling through the endless comments on an article about the incident, she saw a post that cut through all the noise. It was from a woman claiming to be the sister of the waitress who had cried about her children. The post read, "Everyone is cheering for this rich CEO. Well, my sister, a single mom of 2, just lost her job. She wasn't racist. She was scared. She was a month behind on rent, and her new manager was a tyrant she was afraid to cross. Now she might lose her apartment. Is that justice? Or is it just a rich woman's revenge?" Izzy dropped her phone as if it had burned her. The words struck a chord of doubt that had been vibrating within her since that night. She had stood up for herself, yes, but in the process had she become the very thing she hated? Someone who used their power to crush those beneath them without a second thought? The question haunted her, and the victory that had seemed so clear and righteous in the moment now felt like the most profound loss of her career. The ripple effects of that single, cataclysmic decision spread far and wide, touching the lives of the fired crew in ways Izzy could never have anticipated. For them, it wasn't a trending topic or a think piece. It was a brutal, life-altering event. Chad Miller became the poster child for his own downfall. The video of him being fired was his digital scarlet letter. His name, Chad Miller, formerly of Aura, was now inextricably linked with public disgrace. He tried to get another job in hospitality, but the industry in Austin was tight-knit. Every interview began with a polite smile and ended with the unspoken question hanging in the air. He would see the flicker of recognition in their eyes, the slight stiffening of their posture. No one wanted to hire the manager who had been so spectacularly and publicly fired for bigotry. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by a desperate, gnawing anxiety. He lost his downtown condo, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows he loved to brag about. He had to sell his sports car. Within 6 months, he was living in a cramped apartment in a less desirable part of town, taking shifts as a line cook at a greasy spoon diner where no one knew his name. The tailored suits were replaced by a stained apron that perpetually smelled of fried onions. Every time a customer treated him with casual disrespect, he felt the sting of a karma he couldn't escape. His punishment wasn't just unemployment, it was the complete and total demolition of the superior identity he had so carefully constructed. Karen Vance's fate was a different kind of poison. She didn't become as infamous as Chad, but within the service community, her name was mud. She was known as a Chad enabler, someone who kicked down instead of lifting up. She found it impossible to get a lead server position again. She bounced between temp jobs at catering companies and short-lived gigs at chain restaurants, always feeling the whispers and cold shoulders from her new colleagues. The smirk that had once been her signature weapon was gone, replaced by a permanent look of bitter resentment. She blamed Izzy, she blamed Chad, she blamed the woke mob. She blamed everyone but herself. Her karma wasn't poverty, it was a social exile, a constant reminder that the character you show in a moment of crisis is the character you're stuck with. But the story of the collateral damage was far more complex. The single mother Izzy had read about, a woman named Sophia, did lose her apartment. She and her 2 children had to move in with her sister, a humiliating step backward that strained her family relationships to the breaking point. She wasn't a bad person. She was, as her sister wrote, simply afraid. She spent her nights applying for jobs, racked with guilt over her silence and fury at the CEO who had made no distinction between the ringleader and the bystander. The bartenders, the hostesses, the other servers, they all scattered to the winds. Some found new jobs quickly, but always with the stain of having been fired from Aura. They had to explain the situation in interviews, trying to distance themselves from Chad's actions, while simultaneously admitting they had been part of the crew that was fired. It was an impossible tightrope to walk. Then there was Leo Martinez, the young busboy. For him, the firing was a strange and terrifying blessing. The shame he felt that night was a powerful catalyst. He had stood by and done nothing, and the guilt ate at him. He took his small severance, enrolled in a local community college's culinary program, and swore to himself that he would never again be a silent bystander. He didn't want to be in a position of power like Izzy, but he wanted to be a man of character, the kind of person who would speak up. He worked 2 part-time jobs to pay his tuition, one washing dishes and another delivering groceries. It was grueling, humbling work, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was in control of his own destiny. The firing had destroyed his first real job, but it had also ignited his ambition and forged his moral compass. Izzy, unaware of these individual trajectories, was grappling with her own set of consequences. She had anonymous severance packages sent to all the fired employees, 3 months' pay, in a gesture born of her own guilt. It was a fortune to some, an insult to others. She knew it couldn't fix the damage to their reputations or their lives. It was a rich woman's solution, throwing money at a problem that was fundamentally human. The act brought her no peace. The ghost of her decision lingered, a constant, unwelcome companion in her now hollow success. While the former crew of Aura navigated their new fractured realities, Izzy Sterling discovered a chilling truth. You can't fire the soul of a restaurant and expect it to survive. She reopened Aura 2 weeks later with a brand new team. On paper, they were perfect. She had poached them from other high-end establishments, paying top dollar for the best talent. The new manager was impeccably professional. The servers were polished and efficient. The bartenders made flawless cocktails. But something was irrevocably broken. The original crew, for all their flaws on that final night, had been a family. They had a rhythm, an unspoken chemistry that had been built over years. They knew the regulars by name, remembered their favorite drinks, and moved through the dining room with a practiced, harmonious dance. They were the aura of Aura. The new crew was a collection of skilled individuals, not a team. They were mercenaries, not family. The service, while technically perfect, was cold. The warmth was gone. The laughter that used to spill from the server stations was replaced by a sterile corporate efficiency. Diners who had been coming for years noticed the change immediately. The food was still brilliant. Chef Julian made sure of that. But the experience felt hollow. The online reviews began to shift. Food is still amazing, but the place has lost its soul, one read. It felt like I was eating in a very fancy, very boring museum, said another. The 3-month waiting list began to shrink. First to 2 months, then 1. Soon you could get a table on a Friday night with only a week's notice. For a restaurant of Aura's caliber, it was a death knell. Izzy tried everything. She held team-building exercises. She implemented new training protocols focused on authentic hospitality. She was at the restaurant almost every night, a constant, looming presence that only made the new staff more nervous. She was trying to micromanage a feeling back into existence, an impossible task. The harder she tried to fix it, the worse it seemed to get. Her code phoenix had burned the forest down, and she was discovering that new trees don't grow overnight. The viral fame that had once felt like a vindication now felt like a curse. She was the hero CEO who stood up to racism, but she was also the failing restaurateur who couldn't keep her own flagship afloat. The irony was bitter. 6 months after the incident, David Hayes sat her down in her office, a stack of spreadsheets between them. The numbers were brutal. Revenue was down 40%. Staff turnover was astronomically high. The brand, once a beacon of excellence, was now a case study in corporate implosion. Isabella, David said gently, we have to talk about the future of Aura. It's bleeding money. More than that, it's bleeding our reputation. It's becoming a joke. Izzy stared out the window at the Austin skyline, the city she had conquered. I don't understand, David. I did the right thing. I stood up for our values. You did, he agreed. But the consequences, they're not always clean. You made a statement, but the statement is bankrupting the business. Maybe the lesson here is that a business isn't a principle, it's people. And you got rid of your people, the good, the bad, and the silent. It was a hard truth to swallow. Her act of instant justice, the thing the internet had cheered for, was a catastrophic business failure. She had protected her dignity, but sacrificed her dream. The hard karma she had wished upon Chad and his enablers had boomeranged, hitting her not in her wallet. She was still incredibly wealthy, but in her pride, in the very core of her identity as a creator and a leader. She had built an empire on the idea of creating perfect experiences, but she had failed to understand the fragile human ecosystem required to sustain it. She had won the battle but was now losing the war. Aura, her beautiful baby, was dying, and she was the one who had dealt the fatal blow. A year and a half after the Code Phoenix incident, Aura was no more. Izzy had made the painful decision to sell the location. A generic steakhouse chain had bought it, gutting the bespoke interior and replacing her grandmother's recipes with corporate-approved fare. To Izzy, it was the final indignity. The sale made her richer, but she felt poorer than ever. The experience had humbled her. She stepped back from the day-to-day operations of Sterling Hospitality, entrusting them to David. She spent months traveling, reading, and thinking. The firebrand CEO who had leveled her own restaurant was gone, replaced by a more contemplative, quieter woman. She realized that power wasn't just the ability to act, but the wisdom to know how and when. She eventually returned to Austin, not to build another empire, but to start something small. She opened a 20-seat cafe in a quiet neighborhood, calling it the Gray Hoodie. She worked behind the counter herself several days a week, serving coffee and pastries, learning the names of the locals. It was a penance of sorts, a way to reconnect with the simple act of hospitality that had first inspired her. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, almost 2 years to the day of the incident, the bell on the cafe door jingled. A young man walked in, shaking the water from his jacket. He looked up at the menu, then his eyes drifted to Izzy. A jolt of recognition passed between them. It was Leo Martinez, the busboy. He was no longer the scared teenager she remembered. He was a young man now, his face leaner, his posture more confident. He wore the clean white jacket of a culinary student. He stared at her for a long moment before speaking. "Miss Sterling?" "Leo," she said, her voice quiet. "It's good to see you." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with the ghosts of that terrible night. Leo was the one to break it. I go to the Culinary Institute down the street. I never knew this was your place." "It's a new venture," she said with a small smile, "trying to get back to basics. What can I get for you?" "Actually," he said, stepping closer to the counter, "there's something I've wanted to say to you for 2 years. That night, at Aura, I'm sorry." Izzy was taken aback. "You're sorry? For what?" "For being quiet," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. There was no fear in them now, only a steady conviction. "I was new. I was scared of Chad. But that's no excuse. What he said was wrong, and I just stood there. I've never forgotten that. I promised myself I'd never be that person again." His words hit Izzy harder than any criticism she had ever received. Here was one of the people she had fired, one of the lives she had upended, and he was apologizing to her. Tears welled in Izzy's eyes. "Leo, you have nothing to apologize for. I'm the one who's sorry. I acted out of anger and hurt, and I took a torch to everything. I fired a scared kid along with a bigoted manager. I didn't see the difference. In my attempt to deliver justice, I was unjust. Can you forgive me?" Leo looked stunned. The powerful Isabella Sterling was asking for his forgiveness. He nodded slowly. "That night, getting fired, it was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to figure out who I wanted to be. I think," he said with a hesitant smile, "we both learned something." Izzy wiped a tear from her cheek. "I think we did." She gestured to the espresso machine. "Let me make you a coffee. On the house. And tell me about culinary school. Tell me everything." As Leo talked, his face lighting up with passion as he described learning to make a proper consommé, Izzy felt a weight she hadn't even realized she was carrying. The karma of that night had been a brutal, multifaceted thing. It had humbled a bully, exiled an enabler, and devastated the complacent. But it had also shattered her own creation and forced her to confront the limits of her power. Yet here, in the ashes, was something new. A young man's forged character, a humbled CEO's new beginning. Justice, she realized, wasn't a lightning bolt of revenge. It was a slow, painful, and complicated process of reckoning and rebuilding. And sometimes it started with a simple cup of coffee, shared between two survivors of the same storm. Several months had passed since Izzy's reunion with Leo. A quiet, comfortable rhythm had settled over her new life. The Gray Hoodie had become a beloved neighborhood fixture, a place where the scent of freshly ground coffee beans and baking cinnamon mingled in the air. Izzy found a surprising joy in the simple, tactile work. Steaming milk to the perfect microfoam, knowing a regular's order before they spoke, wiping down the counters at the end of a long day. She was no longer a monarch ruling from a distant corporate throne. She was a shopkeeper, present and accounted for. Her mentorship of Leo had blossomed into a genuine friendship. He would come by the cafe on weekends, his culinary school textbooks tucked under his arm, and they would experiment with new pastry recipes in her small kitchen. He was a natural, his hands moving with an intuitive grace. She saw in him a spark of the passion she had once felt for Aura, and nurturing it felt like a way of healing a part of herself. For the first time in years, Isabella Sterling felt something akin to peace. But the past is never truly past. It is merely waiting for an opportunity to reintroduce itself. The opportunity arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon. The lunch rush had subsided, and Izzy was wiping down the espresso machine, humming along to the soft jazz playing on the speakers. The bell on the door chimed. A woman stood there, hesitating on the threshold. She was thin, with tired lines etched around her eyes and mouth. Her coat was neat but frayed at the cuffs, and she clutched a worn leather handbag to her chest like a shield. Izzy offered her standard, friendly greeting. "Welcome in. What can I get for you today?" The woman's eyes, a deep, weary brown, scanned Izzy's face. There was a flicker of something, not recognition, precisely, but confirmation, as if she were matching a memory to reality. She walked to the counter, her movements deliberate. "I'll just have a black coffee, please," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it held a tensile strength. As Izzy prepared the drink, she couldn't shake the feeling that she knew this woman. She searched the archives of her memory. A business meeting? A charity gala? Nothing fit. The woman paid with exact change, then took a seat at the smallest table in the corner, the one overlooking the street. But she didn't look out the window. She watched Izzy. For the next hour, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, the woman sat with her coffee, taking slow, measured sips. Her gaze never left Izzy. It wasn't accusatory or threatening, but it was heavy with unspoken history. The peaceful atmosphere of the cafe suddenly felt charged, the air thick with questions. Izzy's unease grew. Finally, she could bear it no longer. Wiping her hands on her apron, she walked over to the woman's table. "I'm sorry to bother you," Izzy began softly, "but I can't help but feel that we've met before. My name is Isabella." The woman looked down into her empty coffee cup, then back up at Izzy. "I know who you are, Mrs. Sterling," she said, her voice even. "My name is Sophia Garcia. I was a server at Aura." The name hit Izzy like a physical blow. Sophia, the single mother, the sister's comment she had read online, the words that had haunted her for years, suddenly had a face. This face, tired, proud, and profoundly sad. "Sophia," Izzy breathed, sinking into the chair opposite her. I remember." "I'm sure you don't remember me specifically," Sophia said, a touch of old bitterness creeping into her tone. "I was just one of the 27, the one who cried about her kids." "No," Izzy said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do remember. I remember your sister's post. I've thought about you, more times than I can count." Sophia gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Well, that's something, I guess." She finally looked away from Izzy, her gaze turning to the street outside. "I didn't come here for a fight, Miss Sterling. I'm too tired for that. I needed to see you. I needed you to see me. I'm not a comment on a web page. I'm a real person." She turned back, her eyes locking onto Izzy's. "Do you have any idea what happened after that night? Your severance pay, and thank you for it, it kept us from being on the street for 3 months. It ran out. But the damage was done. Every interview I went to, it was the same story. You worked at Aura? Weren't you part of that crew that got fired? I wasn't a racist. I wasn't a bully. I was a coward for a minute, maybe. I was a single mom trying not to get fired by a man I knew was volatile. But that didn't matter. I was tainted." She spoke without melodrama, her words a simple, devastating recitation of facts. She told Izzy about having to pull her kids out of their school when they were evicted, about the shame of moving into her sister's crowded house, about the string of dead-end temp jobs that paid just enough to keep them fed, but never enough to get ahead. "The money you gave me was a patch, Ms. Sterling," Sophia said, her voice breaking for the first time. "But what you took from me was my career, my stability, my good name. There's no severance package for that." The new Izzy, the one forged in the failure of Aura and the quiet humility of the cafe, did not offer excuses. She did not defend herself. She simply listened, absorbing the full weight of the consequences of her actions. This was the unpaid debt, and it had finally come to collect. "You're right," Izzy said when Sophia finished, her own voice hoarse. You're absolutely right. My anger that night made me blind. I saw a principle I had to defend, and I didn't care who got caught in the fire. It was powerful, and it was righteous, and it was profoundly, deeply wrong. I can't apologize enough for the pain I caused you and your family, Sophia. Sorry isn't a big enough word. Sophia just nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. She wasn't looking for an apology, not really. She was looking for acknowledgement. Izzy made a decision. What do you want to do, Sophia? What is your goal? Sophia seemed taken aback. Goal? My goal is to pay my rent on time, to give my kids a bedroom of their own again. She paused, then added, I want to be a restaurant manager someday. That's what I was working towards. I was good at my job. I loved it. Izzy nodded, a plan forming in her mind. This couldn't be fixed with another check. It had to be fixed with something more meaningful. I can't undo what I did, Izzy said, leaning forward, but I can try to build a bridge for you to get to the other side. I have a friend, a good friend, who runs a very successful restaurant group in Portland, a different city, a fresh start. They're looking for an assistant manager. The pay is good, the company has integrity. I want to call him. I want to tell him your story, all of it, and I want to give you the most passionate, unequivocal recommendation of my life. I will stake my own reputation on your character and your skill. She didn't stop there. If you're willing to go, I will cover the moving expenses for you and your children. I will pay for your first 3 months' rent and a security deposit to give you a cushion. This isn't charity, Sophia. This is restitution. It's the least I can do to repair what I broke. Sophia stared at her, speechless. It was more than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just money. It was a chance. It was a respected industry leader offering to use her power, not as a weapon, but as a key to unlock a door that had been slammed in her face. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she whispered. Yes, okay. That afternoon, Izzy closed the cafe early. She sat with Sophia, making the call, speaking with a fierce conviction about Sophia's abilities. She spent the rest of the day with her, helping her look at apartments online, talking to her about her children, treating her not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be seen. As Sophia left that evening, the heavy weariness in her eyes had been replaced by a fragile, flickering light of hope. Izzy watched her go, then stood for a long time in her empty cafe. The peace she had felt earlier was gone, replaced by the somber understanding that atonement was not a destination. It was a long, difficult road, and she had only just begun to walk it. This story is a powerful reminder that actions, especially those born from pain and anger, have consequences that ripple out in ways we can never predict. Isabella's story isn't just about clapping back at a racist manager. It's a profound look at the true nature of justice and karma. It shows us that true strength isn't just about the power to destroy, but the wisdom and grace to rebuild, both in the world and within ourselves. It's a story about how our worst moments can sometimes lead to our most important lessons. What did you think of Isabella's decision? Was it justified, or did she go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life stories that make you think. Your support helps us keep telling these important tales. Thank you for listening.